I wanted to get into trading, become a stockbroker. That was like my vision back in high school, going into college. I think my dad would have been happy if I just worked for the phone company, like many other members of the family, but that didn't happen. So I went to college in upstate New York at a place called SUNY Oswego. Cold winters up there, right on Lake Ontario. My first job out of college was at Waterhouse Securities. We were a retail stockbroker that competed with the Fidelities and the Schwabs and the TD Ameritrades of the world. So my first job at Waterhouse was really just as a registered rep, taking buy and sell orders from various customers throughout the country. I worked there for just under 2 years, and then a leading competitor opened up around the corner called National Discount Brokers in the mid-90s. They had this duck as a logo. Everybody kind of remembers the duck that they had. And so I went on board there and did well. They asked me if I wanted to kind of move out to the Midwest, out to Chicago, to open up one of their satellite offices. And I packed up the Ryder truck and I moved out to Chicago and lived out there for 2 years, kind of establishing their Midwest presence. And then I came back to the New York area with them and opened up a call center in New Jersey, and then ran their trading department in my final year there. So their value proposition was we were pioneering touchtone trading, right? So nobody had the phone at the time. There was no BlackBerry. Everybody had touchtone phones at home, and you didn't have to speak to a broker. You could actually just press the button on the phone and tell them the security you wanted to buy and at what price. So it was real early on, and we had a couple of people sitting by the printers, and someone would enter the order, and then we would rip it off the pin-fed printer and kind of type it into the system and get these orders executed. So you didn't have to speak to a broker. It was the first step of kind of automating that process. Today, we just log on to our accounts and kind of buy and sell without speaking to a broker. That was kind of the first early step back in 93, 94. But the early steps were having 3 humans sitting there by the dot matrix printer and kind of, manually typing it in. So yeah, there were errors. Well, back in those days, I mean, even at Waterhouse, you'd take a, buy or sell order from a customer and they'd say, hey, buy me 1,000 Caterpillar. And, maybe you were thinking of something else and you didn't buy CAT, you bought CAP on accident. And, the customer would say, listen, I told you to buy CAT, not CAP. And we'd have to go to the tape and kind of listen to it and see who was right. So there was a lot of that going on. And then at National Discount Brokers, it was more just a manual error where somebody was misreading the information coming off the printer. But again, that did get automated sooner rather than later. They actually asked me to run customer service for a period of time there to try to clean that up. So when we were at Waterhouse, they had a variety of branch offices around the country. So the service level was very high. People would walk in, you knew the customer was calling. It was a much closer relationship with the end customer. At National Discount Brokers, we were more of this, wasn't brick and mortar. You had your kind of call center. You didn't have that connection with the customers. And we had this explosive growth, which led to some staffing issues. And we weren't, servicing the customers the way that they were accustomed to being serviced at some of the other shops. So yeah, we did have a variety of study groups and trying to figure out what we could do to improve it and shorten the hold times. And yeah, the FAQs was one of the items that worked. I don't think the level of customer service ever got to that of the Fidelity or the Waterhouses of the world, but certainly the hold times, and there was some improvement there. What we were trying to solve was just, come up with like the 10 most commonly asked questions. When the customer service rep answered the phone, what were the most common questions, right? And, if it was, where do I mail my check? We put that on the FAQ. If it was, who do I make the check out to? You put that on the phone. If it was, how long does it take until you need payment, or, what is a margin account? Some of the basic things that customers were asking. I think we did a top 10 and we put that on the FAQs, and then, customers can kind of self-service and get the answers without speaking to a rep. So it was, we always took notes on what the customers were asking. So we had all the information. We just kind of had to clean it up and figure out, what we should put into the top 10 FAQ. First of all, you were dealing with a lot of, new graduates, young kids coming out of school, guys and girls. You're kind of managing your phone volume coming in to make sure that you have the proper staffing. You're rolling it over to different regions that are better staffed. We'd have a premier desk where, large or high net worth customers could call in and kind of, have a direct relationship with a handful of traders there. So we had that and managed that. And then, you had your margin situation too, to make sure that people were, the accounts were properly funded. With their margin calls, you had to reach out to customers, you had to liquidate securities. So there was a bunch going on there to kind of keep everything in order. But it was really, you were always concerned about your call volume, making sure customers didn't wait. You wanted to make sure the high volume customers were being serviced, and you wanted to make sure everyone had enough money in their account. Sherwood Securities, which was one of the wholesalers back then, they started NDB. So we executed our orders over to Sherwood Securities. A gentleman by the name of Artie Contos ran that, and that's where the orders got executed back then. There was an AutoX feature, depending on how many shares it was. I think maybe 500 and below. It was done at at the bid-ask price, depending on if it was a buy or a sell. And then if it was larger than that, if it was larger size, it might need to be worked by the market maker. But there was a certain threshold where they just got executed at the price. So next for me was the Brute ECN. So this was a time when ECNs, or electronic communication networks, were popping up, right? The Island ECN, Archipelago, Strike Technologies, Brute, which was a spin-off of the Brass Order Management System. And I met Bob Greifeld in mid-1997, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to take the job. I wasn't sure if it was the future. He wasn't sure if he wanted to hire me. He said, why don't we talk later in the year? So I met him around Thanksgiving, and we had a good discussion, and I ended up starting there in January of 1998, starting the company with Bob. We brought in a few different partners, Merrill, Morgan, Goldman, and Knight Trading as investors. And we were up and trading by May. And any brass customer out there, any customer that used the Brass Order Management System, had access to the Brute ECN. So for a limit order display, if you had to display an order on an ECN, you could just hit this button and route it right out to Brute. So we did okay at the beginning, and then we merged with Strike Technologies, who had a competing consortium out there. They were owned by 18 other brokers. Now we had to manage 21 different investors, but that was okay. And we still didn't do that well. We were really focused on the broker community. And at this point in time, the high frequency trading was really kicking up. And SunGuard Data Systems ended up buying Brass and Brute. And they asked me to stay on board. And they said, listen, how come you're not doing the volumes of Island or Archipelago? And I said, the technology just isn't there. If we spend X amount, I think it was $500,000 on this type of technology, we can support high frequency trading. So we went and switched out the technology, and we were doing maybe 1% of the market share of NASDAQ listed securities, and 2 years later we were doing 10%. And that's when NASDAQ ended up buying Brute for an enterprise value of, I think it was $240 million. As I joined NASDAQ, they asked me to stay on board, and I was working with Chris Kincannon and Bob Greifeld, trying to get that exchange pointed in the right direction. If you remember, in 2003, NASDAQ was kind of on the ropes, and Bob Greifeld went over there to be the CEO, and that's when they were kind of splitting up from the NASD, and that's when FINRA was formed. So there was a lot going on at that point in time. And we took 10 points of market share away from NASDAQ. So they bought us, they leveraged our technology, our routing broker, and then we started to trade NYSE listed securities. So up to that point, every share that was listed on the New York Stock Exchange traded on the New York Stock Exchange, until we started to trade it on our ECN. And if we didn't have the best execution on our platform, we routed it to the NYSE DOT system. And started out, we got a couple of executions on our book, and then a couple of more. And a year and a half later, we were doing more executions on our book in NYSE listed securities than the whole floor of the New York Stock Exchange. We actually ran an ad on the Wall Street Journal that showed our market share going up and their market share going down. And now they've kind of stabilized, and I think they probably split up their market share like all the other exchanges do, a third between themselves, CBOE and NASDAQ. It was just automation, right? It was deterministic. People put in an order and they knew that they got a fill or they knew that they didn't get a fill. There was no delay. And that's what these traders wanted at that point in time. That's how they were trading on NASDAQ and trading on the ECNs in an electronic format. They didn't want to have this floor-based system that was not deterministic. So they would put it on our platform, and if we got an execution, we gave it to them. If not, we routed it to their new electronic, execution system called DOT, and we would get the customer the best execution. First, it was brute. We integrated the people, and we used the routing broker-dealer to kind of get out to the various exchanges. And then when INET came over, which was using the ILM technology, we leveraged that. We leveraged the matching engine technology. We leveraged their protocols, itch and ouch. And that really separated NASDAQ from the other exchanges out there. They now had world-class technology versus this legacy technology that they were using from, the 70s and 80s. They now had cutting-edge technology. So they had a routing broker, routing technology, and the best matching technology in the world. Then ultimately ended up, Bob asked me to go over and run the market data group. So the global market data was a business that, roughly about 250 million in revenue at the time when I took it over in say 09, 010. And then when I left in 2015, it was probably about 550 million with an 80% margin. So as we know, in the exchange world, the transaction capture rate has gone down dramatically. The pie has gotten bigger over the years, but trading is a tough business, as the exchanges were always the last resort for anybody routing flow around. They'll ping dark pools first and try to get it done off exchange and then route to an exchange. But on the market data side, they had some leverage there, and they had some data that was extremely valuable. So we ran the securities information processor, which is the industry data. But then we also had our proprietary data, and we would kind of use display and non-display, variations of those products. And we even used dark fiber. We built data products using FPGA or hardware to make it more deterministic for the end trader. And then you could charge, a premium for those types of services. So that's how, we increased the revenue from 250 to 550 in 6 years. I got involved in the crypto world at a company called Paxos. So Paxos was an early entrant into the crypto world. They started in 2012 with a platform called ItBit, we're an exchange for Bitcoin. When I got there, they kind of rebranded themselves as Paxos, and we launched a stable coin, which is basically a version of a digital dollar. You give me $1, I give you one stable coin, and you can take that stable coin and using your Ethereum wallet and move it around the world in a second. So if you wanted to give money to your aunt over in Egypt, you could, move a stable coin pretty quickly. So we did that. We created a digitized gold product. Believe it or not, more people than I knew of actually store gold and have gold bars. And there's a storage fee associated with that. So a digitized version of gold made a whole lot of sense. We launched that. We had our exchange trading Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin. And then we became the infrastructure for some large firms like Revolut and PayPal. So as they got into offering crypto on their platform, we were the infrastructure or the intel inside behind it that powered, those platforms. My role at Paxos was really, senior advisor to the exchange, right? We're really, really focused on growing the exchange business and getting, large firms that I knew from my equity days introduced to them and getting them trading on the platform. That was really the focus, in addition to getting these firms trading more products like the digitized gold and the stable coins. I got involved in 2013 and 2014, and it just you felt like it was a good way to kind of move money. And I know people think, oh, crypto, that's taboo. That's for, money laundering. It's actually, you can track crypto a lot better than you can track cash. So, cash, if you want to talk about money laundering and use for, funding drug lords and things like that, cash is the number one thing. Crypto is actually, quite the opposite, where it could all be tracked on the blockchain. So I really just felt like it was going to be a utility, to kind of move money long term. Straight from Paxos, I went to Blue Ocean. I met these guys and they needed some help with funding. And I helped them raise capital from Urbana Corporation, which is the largest investor in the Canadian Securities Exchange. They then asked me to stay on board and kind of be president, chief operating officer, run the company. So we did that. We migrated away from T0. We onboarded Samsung. And here we are today in, May of 2022. With a pipeline of, call it 30 brokers wanting to trade in the Blue Ocean session. And we'll be working on our second round of funding here in the next quarter also. Well, it's all after hours trading, so it's not Reg NMS protected, right? So, we take day limit orders and put them on the system, so you can't have a market order kind of rip through a thin book. So it operates very much like the exchanges do in the pre and post today. I would suspect that at some point in time, I think the exchanges might have to route and be connected, not just during 9:30 to 4, but throughout the trading day to offer best execution to the end customers. We're not there yet. They'll take a lot of regulatory changes to make that happen, but you can envision that happening. But the clearing all works the same. The trade reporting, we do it in a batch format the following morning to the NYSE trade reporting facility. So it's all very, very similar to the way an ATS trades during the daytime hours today.